17. Exodus chapter 17. We got through the first 7 verses last week. We'll try to cover the rest of the chapter tonight. When we came through this section last week, we talked about, from the last 4 chapters, you've got the story of the Red Sea, you've got the story of the manna, the story of the water from the rock. You come over to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and Paul starts to list those same things and then begin to tell us that those things were written for our example. Those things were written so that those that live in this generation could learn not to go lusting after the same things, that we might actually learn from their mistakes, that we might learn from their poor attitude at times not to fall into the same things, okay? We don't have to be doomed to make the same mistakes over and over again. We can learn. Certainly we should hopefully learn from each other's experiences. We are up to chapter 17, verse number 8. Exodus has truly been the story of redemption. We started out in bondage, but then redeemed by blood and by power. And just like the Exodus, we see in the Christian life, right? That just as Israel was redeemed, they then went through a long series of trial and testing. And that's practical help, right? That's life. That those that are saved, those that have been redeemed, it's not a cakewalk as you get through the rest of this world, right? We're on our way to glory, but we've got some trial. We have testings, the provings of our faith. Tonight, we learn that there's also battles to fight. There is a great war that is fought. Spiritual warfare. And that's evident here in this battle at Rephidim. So tonight's lesson, as we try to cover the rest of the chapter, let's talk about war at Rephidim. It says in Exodus 17, verse number 8, "Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim." So this same place, Rephidim, where they just come through the episode with the smitten rock that's given them water, we see that there is a great battle with the Amalekites. Now, the book of Exodus is kind of vague on the background of this fight, so let's do a little comparison of scriptures and find out exactly who we are and where we're at, okay? In the book of Genesis, chapter number 36, if you turn back there real quick, Genesis chapter 36. If I were to say who is Amalek, who are the Amalekites? The Bible tells us who they are. The Bible tells us here in Genesis chapter 36. Verse number 1, Genesis 36, verse 1 says, "Now these are the generations of Esau, who is Edom." And verse number 12, while it's listing the generations of Esau, it says this in verse 12, "And Timnah was concubine to Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bare to Eliphaz Amalek." These were the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. Amalek is the descendant and grandson of Esau. It's a name that means warlike. And we can see that in our text. We see that in our passage as Amalek and the children of Israel go to war. This is definitely that struggle, right? You see it even all those generations later. We talk about the story of Jacob and Esau, right? The battle of Jacob and Esau. We talk about those being typical of that battle of the spirit with the flesh. That is an ongoing, recurring battle in the Old Testament. These descendants of Jacob against these descendants of Esau. Turn over to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 25. Deuteronomy chapter 25, we actually see a few more details about this battle, a little bit more than was actually given to us in Exodus. Deuteronomy chapter 25. Deuteronomy 25, verse 17. "Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way when ye were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God." Now, undoubtedly, The Bible tells us that these descendants of Amalek, these Amalekites, were ungodly men. They did not fear God. But we also get a little more insight into this battle and how they actually attacked the children of Israel. Were you guys able to pick up on the details of what the Bible says there? It was an ambush, right? They attacked them from behind. According to verse number 17 and 18, it talks about how he met thee by the way and smote the hindmost of thee. Those that were feeble behind, they wait and they come up behind them and they take those ones that were behind, and whether that, obviously women, children, the elderly, the weak, those were the ones that were susceptible to the attack here. Those are the ones that Amalek went after. That's a terrible testimony. That is a terrible look to attack in that kind of style, in that kind of ambush. Look what it says in verse 19 here of Deuteronomy 25. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about, in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it. So what happened there in our text in Exodus 17 and these further details that were given? Ambush. They attacked them from behind. They took advantage of the weak, those that were trailing behind, right? Those that were feeble, maybe those that were struggling to keep up, or maybe those that were intentionally at the back. And God took this personally, as an attack against his people. And he told them, listen, when this is over, and when you finally get into the land and you get settled, do not forget these events. Do not forget what Amalek did unto you. Because according to these verses, and we'll see it later in Exodus 17, he says, I want you to blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. This was a vicious attack. This was an ambush. This was taking advantage of the weak and those that were trailing behind. Warfare. Turn back to our text in Exodus 17. We learn that Amalek would forever be the enemy of God, be the enemy of the Israelites, God's people. And God did not want Israel to forget that. In fact, the time would come that he wants them to remember these events and take care of them and annihilate them, remove them. Now again, the background is given so that we can truly understand the spiritual application of that. It's what it tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I mentioned before that many see in Amalek, or a descendant of Esau, that constant struggle that rings through in the Scripture. That story of Jacob and Esau, that battle between the spirit and the flesh, spiritual warfare. That is the next step in the life of a Christian, right? That once a Christian is redeemed, and there's a series of trials, and then there's a series of testings, then comes the reality of spiritual warfare. And honestly, one of the biggest battles that we fight is that battle of Jacob and Esau. It's that spirit versus the flesh, right? It's our own selves. Like the guy in the mirror is the one that gives you the most trouble, right? We fight with our own attitudes. We fight with our own motives. We fight with our own selves more than we fight with other people, right? Other people don't cause me nearly as much trouble as I cause myself. Now, I'm a lot more forgiving of myself than I am of you, and forgiving of other people. I kind of kid about that. But it's true that our struggle with ourselves, the battle that we fight with ourselves, is tough and it's intense. And only after redemption did they experience this warfare. You remember what we talked about and how in Egypt, they never fought against the Egyptians. And in fact, when they came out of Egypt, God took them away in particular so that they would not immediately fight any battles. The direction they went was on purpose. At the Red Sea, they didn't fight, but now they must engage in warfare. In Galatians chapter 5 and verse number 17, those that are new creatures in the Lord Jesus Christ fight a spiritual struggle. We too feel the power of the old nature, and we war against it. It says in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 17, for the flesh lusteth, it warreth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would. Like there's an ongoing battle, right, that rages between the new man and the old man. Now, in this world, we're not going to ultimately see any eradication of the flesh, right? That's not reality. That's not something that we achieve until we're in glory someday. Thankfully, the Bible tells us that we'll wake up in glory someday, and someday in the process of glorification, we'll be made just like Jesus Christ, and there'll be a day that we never sin anymore, and there'll be a day that the things of this world and things of the flesh aren't reality and don't hinder us anymore. But while we live here in this world, remember, we're on the other side of the Red Sea now. We have been delivered from Egypt. And yet there's a battle, right? There is a struggle. There is a war, a true and real spiritual warfare. But the Bible tells us that we are to mortify the flesh. We are to have an unrelenting battle against the sin that is in our lives, right? When the Bible tells us to mortify the deeds of the flesh, kill those things, right? Put them to death. Do not let those things take advantage. Do not let those things take hold. Don't give any place to those things, the Bible tells us. You read in our text in Exodus chapter 17 and our text in Deuteronomy 25 about those that were attacked, right? The weak, the most distant. You know, the Bible tells us that our adversary is a roaring lion. He walks around seeking whom he may devour. He walks around looking for weaknesses. You remember what the Bible tells us? Jesus said to Peter, Satan has desired to have you, that he might sift you as wheat. We remember the Bible tells us in the book of Job that as Satan approaches the Lord, and the Lord says, have you considered my servant Job? And what was Satan's answer? Satan knew all about Job. He knew that God had protected him. He knew the things that God had done and the blessings and the hedges of protection he had put around him. Satan had already been sniffing around. And so we have to be careful. We have a great adversary. We have a great spiritual warfare. Exodus 17, verse 8, then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Number 2, the battle in the trenches. The battle in the trenches. It says in verse number 9, Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy. And they took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side, the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Now, what originally started off as an ambush ends up in full-scale war, right? And from the terminology and language that's used here, the Amalekites are decently skilled, right, in battle. They are able to hold their own. And there's a little bit of back and forth there. This battle lasted, according to verse number 12, all day, right? Until the going down of the sun. And it's interesting how the Bible tells us that this story plays out, right? There is an ongoing war down on this battlefield. We're introduced to a new character for us. His name's Joshua. He's going to play a pretty important role here throughout the rest of Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy and Joshua. But you read here in verse number 11 that it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. So you kind of get that picture set up, right? That you've got Joshua and the troops that are down in the valley and they're fighting the battle. And you've got Moses, you've got Aaron and Hur, and they're standing up there more on the mountainside. And as they're overlooking and watching this battle, as Moses is able to raise his hands, right, in a very, very simple type or picture, right, of intercession. Moses is the great intercessor. You're going to see that here throughout the book of Exodus, and he becomes a great picture of intercession and prayer. And as he holds his hands up, Israel wins, right? Well, problem solved, right? Because, just hold your hands up there and Israel wins. Like Moses puts his hands up Israel starts to gain victory. They start to push them back. They start to get the upper hand. Guess what happens? Moses gets tired. Okay? I know it sounds easy, but just kind of do this and see how long you last, right? Just see how long, and I don't know if it was like this or if it was like this. It doesn't really give us any indication. But I know that this right here starts to burn after a while, right? And the longer that you hold your hands out or up, and it starts to burn, and it starts to hurt, and you have to take a break for a second. Well, guess what happens? He puts his hands down, and Israel starts to lose. And I don't know if it's indicative of people looking to Moses and their confidence maybe he gets lost or what's going on. But as soon as his arms fall down, Amalek regroups, right? And they start to push back, and they start to gain the advantage, and they start to get a little momentum in this battle. And it seems like this went on for a little bit, right? That when his arms were up, good. When his arms fall, not so good. So it tells us there what they decided to do in verse 12. Because Moses' hands were heavy, they took a stone and put it under him. And he sat thereon, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, one on one side, the other on the other side. So his hands could be steady until the going down of the sun. Teamwork, group intercession, and they come and they set Moses down. They put a rock under him. That's comfortable. But a place at least where he can lean, and they can get on one side of him and help hold his hands up. Now, I don't know what that looked like. Did they support him at his elbow? Did they just grab his wrist and hold him up there as long as they could? They came alongside him to help and to keep his arms held up. Now, this passage is a really good example of what it means to intercede, right? This about intercession, about intercessory prayer. That's long been seen in this example of how Moses, with his hands upraised, is able, in a sense, to sway this battle back and forth, right? So there's some key players here in this, right? Now, this doesn't work if everybody's not doing their part, right? Somebody has to fight the battle, right? That's Joshua. Joshua's the one that's down there, and he's in the action, and it's hot and heavy, and he's involved, and he's warring, and he's battling. You've got Moses, right? The great intercessor. You've got Moses, the great leader of the children of Israel. And there he stands with his arms extended and his arms held up, swaying this battle, leading them to victory. But he's weak, right? Nobody can do this forever. Nobody can do this for hours on end. This is a long battle, right? This thing lasts all day. So along comes his brother Aaron and Hur, and they stay up his hands and they hold him up so that Israel can get a great victory. And verse 13 says that they discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Now, who's the weakest link in the story? Which guy can we do without? What do you think? Who do you think? If you could take one guy out of the story, which one would you take out? I'm not sure that it works if you take any of them out, right? Who gets the credit? Let's ask that. Who gets the credit in this story? Now, you might be tempted to think that, well, Moses, right? Because it's Moses and his hands being raised or lowered that actually impacts at the end of the day, whether they win or lose, right? Okay, I see that. That's a good argument. Well, what about Aaron and Hur? Moses can't keep his hands up by himself. Maybe they're the heroes of the story, right? Because they're the ones that actually keep Moses' arms up so that this battle can continue and Joshua can finally get an ultimate victory. Well, when we can't leave out Joshua, right? Somebody actually has to do the work. Somebody actually has to fight the battle. We often, right, when we talk about the Lord's work, we often plot out roles and what we consider is most important, right? And we often try to allot credit, and we're like, okay, well, this role means more than this role, and if this so-and-so is doing this job, this is more important than that job. Well, we're now in a scene where you can't do that, right? You can't tell me who's the most important. You can't tell me who we can leave out of this story. Now, there's a great balance there, right? Every battle needs a Joshua. Somebody's got to fight this thing. And sometimes it's your day down in the heat of the sun and in the hot of the day, and you're fighting. And you're just trying to hold on, and you're trying not to lose any ground, and you've got a battle, and you're warring, whether it be against the enemy or whether it's against yourself, and you're swinging, and you're just trying to survive the day. And there's other days when it's your turn on the mountainside, and guess what? Somebody that's fighting their battle is looking up to you for help and hoping that you're praying and hoping that your hands are out extended and hoping that they can look to you for support and look to you as someone that's there, that they can count on, someone that's interceding, right? I know that in the midst of my battle, right, when I'm struggling with something, when I'm fighting with something, I really hope you guys are praying for me, right? I really hope that you're interceding for me. I hope that, when I think about my church family, when I think about those that I'm closest to, that, you know what, I'm in the grind and I'm hurting and I'm struggling and I'm trying my best. And it seems like 1 hour I'm winning and 1 hour I'm losing, and I'm gaining ground, then I'm losing ground. And I'm thinking, man, I sure hope they're praying for me. And it's so encouraging to find that you are. Wouldn't it make sense then, and doesn't it just seem proper and right and Christian to do the same for you when you're in your battle? Hey, I appreciate you praying for me. I'll let you know next time I need more of them, right? I need to be praying for you. We need to be praying for each other. Because listen, tomorrow, I don't know if you'll be Joshua, and I don't know if you'll be Moses, and I don't know if you'll be Aaron or Hur. Now, what I do know is that every piece of this puzzle matters. I know that every piece, every person that was involved in this thing was necessary. That if you leave one of them out, this doesn't work. Brother John just read us through the book of Colossians on Sunday as we prepare to go through this book. Do you remember what he said right at the end of that book, Colossians chapter 4? Colossians chapter 4. Now, Joshua might get the most credit, right? Well, that's the most physical, right? That's the most demanding, because he's the one that's down there fighting. He's battling. He's got the sword in his hand. Well, according to Colossians chapter 4, verse 12, when he says, Epaphras, who is one of you, a servant of Christ, saluteth you, always laboring fervently for you in prayers. That doesn't make it sound like that's just an easy cakewalk in the park either, right? Sometimes prayer, sometimes intercession, that's a battle. That's a laboring, right? That takes work. Sometimes we don't see it that way, right? We look at the jobs that people do, and I get it. Sometimes when we use the word prayer warrior, but I think if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we use the word because, we want to make it sound better than we really think that it is. Because there's times in our minds when we're like, but all they're doing is praying. Like, I'm actually the one that's struggling. I'm actually the one that's fighting. I'm actually the one that's battling. And it's not that I don't appreciate the prayers, but we don't maybe even see the value in them or the importance in them. And I hope that story with Moses, with Aaron and Hur, with those that are interceding, show you the importance and the value of each piece of this battle, of each piece of this story. Laboring for someone in prayer matters. It helps. It's important. It's important to them. It's helpful to know that when you're starting to lose ground and when you're starting to fall back or you're on the retreat and you can look up and see someone's hands going up for you, that helps. It literally helped Joshua. It helped win the battle that day. And I get it. Somebody's got to fight. And there's going to be times that you've got to be down there in the midst of the action. And you've got to fight against the devil. And you've got to fight against your own self and your own flesh hard. And it's a battle. And it's a struggle. And you've got to try. If I said mortify the flesh earlier, like the Bible says, I didn't mean to pretend that that was easy. Fighting against your own self, your own lusts and desires, and your own stinky motives, that is hard work at times. And fighting the enemy that's out there is difficult as well. But it's got to be done, and we have to give it our best shot. We have to in prayer and in trust, we got to try in this thing, okay? We can't give up. We have to fight against the flesh. We've got to fight against we got to fight the warfare of this world. But see how these mix. See the importance of each aspect, okay? Don't neglect to pray for each other. Don't neglect to pray for those that are fighting hard in these battles. You come to Moses, Aaron, Hur, and Joshua, and a great battle is won that day. And I'm not sure when you get to the end of it, which one of the four deserves the most credit. So what do? Well, let's see who they gave the credit to. Did you know that they actually give somebody the credit? They give somebody the credit. In Exodus chapter 17, let's go back. They give the credit, number 3, the banner of Israel. Exodus 17, verse 14, and the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar, and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi, or the Lord our banner. For he said, because the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now, Jehovah Nissi means Jehovah is our banner. That victory flag, right, that's planted when you win. That banner that you rally under, right? That banner that you rally to. Jehovah, the Lord, our banner. When this battle was done and every person played their part, and they did it to perfection, right? Everybody did all that they could. Some of them, it was grabbing the sword, and some of them, it was interceding on the hillside. But everybody played their part. Everybody did the best that they could. And when the battle was won, who got the credit? They gave God the credit. They said the Lord is our banner, right? They said the Lord is the banner that we rally to, that we rally around, and that we rally under. This was not, I can paint the picture like who's the most important one, right? Who's the most important person in this story? And I can make the compelling argument for any of these guys because you can't leave any of them out. But you get to the end and they all rally around the same cause, that it's God that gave us this victory. Right? That the Lord is our banner. And they remembered what the Lord had said, and they wanted to make sure that the crown got put on the right head. I think everybody that day was important. I think everybody did a great job. I think everybody did the best that they could, and they are all to be commended for their effort. They came off that battlefield and knew that God was the one who made the difference that day. They knew that God had made the difference and gave the ultimate victory that day. Now listen, we're going to win some and we're going to lose some. In some battles someday we're going to gain ground, and some days we're going to lose some ground. But when it's all said and done and we get the ultimate victory and we come through this thing and we learn from our trial and we grow from our battle, let's too make sure that the crown goes on the right head, okay? Let's make sure that we give glory where it is due. And listen, I want you to pray for me. And when I'm down there fighting, I want to do a good job. And when you're down there fighting, I want you to do a good job. And I want to pray for you. But let's make sure the banner that we're trying to rally to, okay? Let's make sure that the crown always goes on the right head and that we give God the glory. This was a big day. This was a very, very important day. God won a great victory. This was important because it was the first battle, right? They hadn't fought any battles yet. This is the first one that we've come across. They didn't fight any in Egypt. When Pharaoh tried to track them to the Red Sea, even then they didn't fight. This is the first time that they really are getting the swords out and they're learning how to fight. And they learn important lessons about fighting, about intercession, and about giving the glory to the one that really brings the victory. What Amalek did here burned in God's nose, though, right? This made God mad, that they attacked from behind and they took advantage of the weak. And you read it here in verse number 16, the Lord has sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. We read in Deuteronomy 25, verse 19, that the day is coming, I am going to annihilate, we are going to take care of Amalek. Do you remember the day that God set out to take care of Amalek? 1 Samuel chapter 15. Turn there real quick. 1 Samuel chapter 15. God said he would have perpetual war. God said the day's coming. When you come in that land, don't forget this, because the day has come when the day will come when we will take care of Amalek. 1 Samuel chapter 15, look at verse 1. Samuel also said unto Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how that he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. And this is the day, right? We talked about it in Exodus 17, Deuteronomy 25. Okay, we are now at that day. So Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 footmen and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. And Saul said unto the Kenites, go, depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For ye showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. And so the Kenites departed out from among the Amalekites. And Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive. All right. And utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and of the oxen and of the fatlings and of the lambs, all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. But everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. Now, I'm not going to keep reading. We've talked about Saul and we've talked about David. We came through 1 Samuel. But you remember that this battle with the Amalekites and Saul's decision to leave the king, Agag, alive, and them not to utterly destroy, verse number 9, the sheep and the oxen and all that. This becomes Saul's downfall, that he did not obey. This is the classic text, right, in 1 Samuel 15, where the Bible tells us that God would rather have them obey, right? Verse 22, hath the Lord his great delight in burnt offering and sacrifice, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. And we remember that, right? Saul, because of his disobedience, lost his kingdom, right? We know from this point on, he's going to lose this kingdom, and God is going to raise up David to be the next king. But listen, don't take 1 Samuel 15 just as an isolated story, right? This is a day that was needed for hundreds of years, right? God remembered what happened hundreds of years ago when they came out of Egypt and Amalek attacked them from behind and showed no pity and attacked the weakest of those that had lagged behind. And God said, I will not forget this day. And Israel, you don't forget this day. And when you come into the land, we will take care of the Amalekites. 1 Samuel 15 was that day. That now they are there, they have a kingdom, they have plenty of an army, they can fully execute what God told them to do. And Saul wouldn't do it. And now you see that it's disobedience. But man, now that you know the backstory, you're like, man, what was he thinking? Like, this was a day that was like on the calendar. Like, this is the day they were looking to for hundreds of years. They finally get to avenge what Amalek had done to their women, to their children, to their weak, to their elderly, all those years before. And Saul made a business decision and decided not to do it. And this day was not supposed to go this way. Amalek had done God's people incredibly dirty when they came out of Egypt. And when the day came for justice, Saul pulled his hand back. And this was a day that had been brewing and stored up for a long, long time. Now do you see why 1 Samuel 15 is the big deal that it was? Yes, it was disobedience, but man, this was a day that was talked about in Exodus and Deuteronomy and previous to this. And Saul just dropped the ball. Okay? I hope that gives you maybe even just a little more of a hint as to why 1 Samuel 15 was as big a deal to Samuel and to God as it was. Amalek had attacked Israel, and with no mercy and with no pity, took advantage of the weakest among them. Now, God gave them a great, great victory that day. And listen, there's going to be days in your weakness that you feel attacked, okay? And you're just going to have to get out there and you're going to have to battle. And I want to pray for you when you do. And when I'm battling, I want you to pray for me. And together, under the Lord's banner and under His glory, let's fight these battles. Let's pray for each other. Let's give God the credit when we come through, all right? Great story. It's only 9 verses, the last half of Exodus chapter 17, but it's Israel's first battle. And they learned some super important lessons, right? About victory, about glory, intercession, all of those things. Practical help for all of our battles. All right, let's be dismissed. Let's have prayer.